Hi and welcome to today's video. And for today, we'll actually be doing Python dictionaries. So let's dive right into it. And before we start this, kindly subscribe and hit the bell notification. Receive notifications whenever I'll be dropping a new video. So what do we mean by Python dictionaries? On our previous video, we did a bit of lists. We learned how to create lists, how to manipulate. By manipulate, I mean add values, move values, etc. So dictionary is somehow like a list, but an advanced list, such that a dictionary stores value in terms of keys, stores data in terms of keys and values. So what do I mean by keys and values? Let me first create my main file. So go ahead and open your code editor. We will be writing our sample code. So when I say keys and values, let me first create a dictionary, then explain what I mean. So go ahead and create your variable. In my case, I'll be using the variable student. Then you can actually note there's some similarities. Not similarities, different from a list. In list, we use the square brackets, whereas in the dictionary, we're using the curly braces. This is how we basically create a dictionary. Now, we've already created, but as you can see, our dictionary is empty, meaning that it doesn't hold any data. How do we add the data? So I'll just give an example, then I'll explain. I'll go ahead, name, Victor, age, what else, gender. So we have ended up defining a name and provided Victor, an age 20 and gender male. So I started by saying that a dictionary basically stores data in forms of keys and values. So you can actually note that in each and every instance, you start by creating a key. So the key is the first part, then the value is the second part. So basically, whenever you refer to this key, it should give us the corresponding value. So in this example, our list has 3 keys, and you've said that the key is the first part. So our first part is the name, then after the comma we have the age, and after this other comma we have the gender. So we basically have 3 keys: the name, age, and gender. But these keys are used to refer to the corresponding values. So which are the values in our case? For the name, it corresponds to the value Victor. For the age, it corresponds to the value 20. For the gender, it corresponds to the value male. So on this line of code, we've basically created a list, not a list, sorry, a dictionary. And I've actually explained that it basically stores data in forms of keys and value. So one thing to note, can actually see that we have the name, we have keys, the name, age, and gender. One thing to note is that dictionaries don't actually allow duplicate keys. What do I mean by duplicate keys? Meaning that if we repeat the same key twice, remember the key is the first part. In our case, name, age, and gender. So if I go ahead and maybe write age, so you'll actually note that I'm actually repeating this. If I end up writing age and maybe giving a separate value, maybe 30, if I print this, let me print, student. If I print this, you'll see you'll actually see that it doesn't give me the duplicate values. Instead, it takes the last value of our duplicate of the repeated key and assigns it to the original. So, let me explain this again. By duplicate values, this is where you have two similar keys. In our case, we have the keys, we say that the keys are the first part. In our case, we repeated the key age. And this age referred to the corresponding value 20, but we later repeated it and said and referred it to that our first value was 20, then our second value is 30. As you can note from the output, it does not give us two similar keys like in our case. Instead, it takes the last value and assigns it as the overall value. So in our case, we started by assigning age as 20, but it ends up giving us 30. And one thing to note, it doesn't allow duplicate values. So let me write that here. Doesn't allow duplicate. Keys. So we've already created our key, our dictionary. Also, in our previous video, we had covered something to do with data types. And in the data types, we specified the string, integer, and Boolean. By string, we refer to the text. And one thing to note, they're always accompanied by quotation marks. The integers are basically numbers, and while Booleans are basically true or false values. In our case, you can see we have used two types of data. We have used the string, which I've said are accompanied with quotation marks, and we've used the integer. So, does the dictionary restrict you to using one data type? No, it does not. You can actually enter any kind of data type that you'd like. So let me give another example. Maybe, let's say, what else? I'll go ahead and write student. So this should return a value of whether he or she is a student. This is a perfect example of where we can use Boolean. In our case, let's say he's a student, 20 years. So I'll basically write true. So you can actually see that in our, let me print this so that we confirm that it doesn't bring up any errors. As you can see, it doesn't brought up any errors. So you can confirm that, that the dictionary can take any type of value from strings, which we've used, integers, and booleans. We can also get the length of our dictionary. So basically, the length gives us the number of items inside. So how do we do this? You go ahead and write the word len, L-E-N, then use brackets, then you specify your variable. So let me print. It actually gives us a length of 4. So how has it counted? It has counted after each comma. So this is one value, 2, 3, and finally 4. So this len function used to find the length of our dictionary is not only used in dictionaries. You can use it in lists. You can use it in strings. Yes, lists, strings, and dictionaries. Those three. Dictionaries is what we are covering today. Lists we covered on our previous video, and strings are basically words accompanied by quotation marks. So we've already created our class. What we want to do next is get the data. So how do we get the data? So So go ahead and reference. We want to print this, so I'll write print. Then I'll reference the variable I used to create a dictionary. In my case, it is student. Then one thing you need to note, I'm using the square brackets, and inside I'll have to refer to any of these keys. Remember, the keys are the first part, meaning in this case, the key is the name. In this case, it's age. In this case, it's gender. And finally, in this case, it's student. So let's say I want to identify the name. So I'll just go ahead and write it as I wrote it when I was creating name. Don't forget the quotation marks. If I run this, you'll actually see it only brings out one value, which is Victor. Let's try maybe for gender and see what it gives us. Male. And that's how we get the data. So according to the data we've gotten, we are only specifying one. How am I going to display this? Okay, so according to this example, we're only getting one set of value. We're only getting the one set of value. So what if you could get all the values inside your list? Remember, we have keys and you have values. The keys are the first part and the values is the second part, separated by a semicolon. So how can we get all the keys, or maybe how all the values? How do we do this? So I'll go ahead. So we'll start by getting the keys. So I'll go ahead and print student dot keys. Don't forget the brackets. Remember, you said that the keys refer to the first part, and as you can see, it brought us name, age, gender, and student. So it ends up bringing all the keys of a dictionary. In our case, the keys is the first part separated by a semicolon. The semicolon is this punctuation mark. So in our case, we had 4 keys, which is the name, age, gender, and student. What if we only want to get the values? So you have the keys and you have the values. So how do we do this? So go ahead, you only change the values part, the keys part, and change it to values. So I'll just write values. And I'll run it. And you can actually see it only gives us the value. In our case, we had Victor as the value in the name case, 20 in the age, male in the gender, and true in the students. So next, we're going to check if a key exists. If you actually watched my previous video, you were able to check whether an item appears in the list. So what we did, we introduced a new concept for the beginners, which is the if function. So what did you do? We end up writing a statement if, in our case, let's say we want to check whether the value age exists. So if age, remember in programming everything is case sensitive, from variables to letters. If age I refer to our dictionary student, print age exists. So what does this do? Whenever you're using an if statement, this tells the program to check whether our code satisfies the condition. So what's the condition in this case? Our condition is if the value age is inside our dictionary. If it is inside our dictionary, it ends up running the code below, but if it is not, it doesn't run. So let's test this. You can actually see it tells us age exists. So let's try something else. Let's say maybe something such as even, and we'll run and see if it runs the code. You can see it doesn't print out anything. So basically it checks the condition. Our condition is if the value even exists inside the dictionary, and even does not exist, meaning that it doesn't do anything. Next, you're going to learn how to change values, but let me note this. So you'll see that this checks if a key exists. Remember, the key is the first part, whereas the value is the second part. And I'll return it to its default value. We're using age, and remember, case sensitive. So how do we change the values? So let's say we'll use the example we already have. We had the student which had four keys, sorry for that: name, age, gender, and student. So what if we want to change the values of any of these keys? What do we do? We'll go ahead and let's say we want to change the value of the name. So I'll go ahead and I'll refer to the variable I used to create my dictionary, then use the square brackets, and you said you're only changing the name, and use an equal sign to assign a new value to it. This time we could use maybe Benson. So this basically changes the value. So how do you change the value? You basically refer to our variable that holds the dictionary and use the square brackets to specify the key whose value you want to change, and finally use the equal sign to assign the new value to our key. So let's print this. I think we should print before and after changing so that we see the difference. So I'll print student. So let's print. You can actually see the difference. In our first case, the value was Victor, whereas in our second case it is key. So this applies to any of these other keys. You just have to change the variable. Let's maybe try something else. Let's try age. And one thing you need to note that is that the key you specify here inside these brackets will be written the same as how it was. It's actually case sensitive, meaning that if in the first case it was a capital letter, it should correspond in the second case. It should be a capital letter. If not, it will actually bring up an error. So let's say this time we want to change this to maybe that T. Let's print. You can actually note in the first case it was 20, in the second case it was 30. So this basically changes the value. Change the value. Apart from changing the value, we can also add a value. How do we do this? So it's actually easy. It's actually same to, okay, let me write it before I explain. So we are going to add items, add items. So how do we do this? We'll basically just reference the variable you used to create a dictionary. Then use the square brackets. So here's where the difference comes in. So it's actually similar to what we've done here, but the only difference is that the key that you're specifying doesn't exist in your original list. So what do I mean it doesn't exist? So in our case, we had 4 keys: the name, age, gender, student. So if we decided to introduce a new set of a new key, let's say maybe what can you let's say school, then I basically come and assign it here and write j quad. So actually know that when we were changing the value, you said that the value that you specify here will exist here. But when you are adding a new item, the value doesn't exist. In our case, the name school doesn't exist in these keys. So what happens? So to see what happens, we'll print this. So I'll just print student. Let me print it even before making these changes to see the difference. So if I run this, you can actually note the second one is bigger since it involves the key school and gives a corresponding value g quad. That's how you add. So if we can add, we can also remove. So how do we remove? Let me delete this. So next we want to remove item. Go ahead and reference the variable you used to create. Then you use the dot pop. Then the key. So in our case, which key should we remove? Let's say we want to remove the school. I'll print student before and after this. So okay, let me run this. For those who watched my previous video, we also used pop in our list when removing items from a list. Nothing changes. It's actually the same in the dictionary. So I ended up referencing the variable I used to create my dictionary. Then I used the function pop. So our variable dot pop, and inside the brackets to specify the key. Remember, the key is the first part. So in our case, since we wanted to remove the set of values school and gquad, we referenced the key. The key was school. So you can actually see from our output, when we ended up printing it for the first time, it had the value school and gquad. Whereas in the second part, the school and jquat had been removed. So this is the work of the dot pop. Next, aside from deleting one item at a time, you can also completely delete everything. So how do we do this? So let me comment this. So remove all items from the list. Not list, dictionary, sorry for that. So we'll just do the same. So this is the same as the list. You just reference your variable dot clear. So you can actually see that the dictionary has some similarities to the list, but these two things are not exactly the same. Let's print this before and after to note the difference. So you can note that in the first part, it had all the values, whereas when we printed it, the second part, it doesn't have any values since we ended up deleting all the values inside. So that's how we delete all the values. Let me comment this out before we go to the next part. So the next part is looping through. I think we also covered this in the list part. So you can actually, by loop through, we explained that a loop is basically repeating the same thing for doing the same thing for a repeated number of times. So basically, we end up going through all the values of a dictionary in our case, or the previous time it was in our list. We end up going through all the values and we end up carrying out as a set of defined functions. So let's do it practically for you to understand. To loop through dictionaries and lists, you basically used for. So I'll go ahead and write for I in, then refer to my dictionary for I in student, print I. So I said that looping is basically repeating, it's basically carrying out, it's basically doing something for a repeated number of times. So this basically goes through all the values of the student and it repeats a set of defined functions inside in our instance. The set of defined functions is printing the value we are looping through. So it should print I. So let's see what I is. You can actually see I gives us the keys. Remember, the keys is the first part, whereas the value is the second part. And these two are separated using colons. And finally, we're going to cover the nested dictionaries. So by nesting, basically, it's like something inside. Okay. In this case, when we refer to nesting dictionaries, we basically mean creating a dictionary inside another dictionary. We also have nested functions, which basically means a function inside a function. But in our case, since we're covering the dictionaries, we basically mean a dictionary inside a dictionary. So how do we create a nested dictionary? Let's go ahead. Let me finish here. So let's say I'll comment this out. Let's say we have okay. So let's say we want to create a list that stores the data for children. So in this list, it has the data for children. And aside from the data, the children's data, we also have the name. Let me write this first. So basically, we want to create a function, not a function, a dictionary. And our first dictionary should store the children's name. Then the children's name should store the details of the children, which is the name, age, etc. I actually understand it when I start writing. So I could maybe start by writing child one. I'll start with zero, child zero. Remember, to create a dictionary, you need the curly braces. There are these types of brackets. So you've said you want the name, Amy, and we could also add the gender. I'll use one letter to represent the gender, and finally age 5. We have our first child. I want to repeat the same and maybe add a second child. So child 1. So I'll change the name to maybe Victor. The same, it's a boy. So for the gender, I'll be representing it with M, and maybe for the age 10. So these are two children's dictionaries, but now we want to access these from one dictionary. So I'll come and create another dictionary and call it children. Then I'll give the key as child 1, child 0. Then I'll refer to our variable. Then repeat the same, child 1. So let's try printing our dictionary children. Print. Let me change this. So let's print this. You can actually see we have our overall dictionary, but inside the dictionary we have another dictionary. So for the child 1, we have another dictionary which specifies the name, gender, age, and we also have another child which has the same values. So does accessing the values of this dictionary change? No. So how do we access the data? The same way you reference your dictionary, which is in our case we'll be referencing it from children, then use the square brackets. Then you can either choose child 0 or 1. Let me use 1. Then, so child 1 returns this dictionary. So what do you do to access another dictionary? You'll add another set of square brackets. And let's say we want to obtain the name. Then name. So it brings us text. It brings back Victor. So how did this happen? We started by referencing our dictionary variable, which is children, which is this. Then instead the children, we refer to our child 1, this child 1. So in our case, our child 1 was this, and it represented the values in child 1. So this, our second one, was a variable. You can even note with the color scheme. So this was a variable. So here's where they created the variable. Then after obtaining the variable, which we did up to this section, we tell it to obtain the values of the name inside that dictionary. So what was the value of the name is? So it ends up returning Victor. So we've actually come to an end. Thank you for staying tuned. Don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell notification. Let's meet in the next video. Goodbye.